Our thought for today is, treat other people like Chick-fil-A treats you. Today we look at this Gospel of John, chapter 5. It's the third sign, the third miracle in the Gospel of John. As you know, John only focuses on 7 miracles. The other Gospels give us 30 to 33 different miracles, but John just focuses on 7 signs. The first, the wedding feast of Cana, where Jesus changes water into wine, works his first miracle. The second we heard yesterday, the healing of the royal official's son. Today, the healing of the man at the pool of Bethesda. The fourth sign is the multiplication of the loaves and the feeding of the 5,000. The fifth sign is the curing of the man who was born blind. The sixth, the raising of Lazarus. And the seventh, Jesus' own resurrection. Each of those are signs. They point to greater realities about Christ and his divinity. And so today the church gives us the third sign, the curing of the man at the pool of Bethesda. The word Bethesda means the house of mercy, the house of grace, the house of favor. Bethesda, like Bethlehem, means the house of bread. Bethpage, the house of figs. Today we have a miracle that occurred in the house of mercy, and you truly see Jesus bringing mercy and healing to this man who had been paralyzed, lame for 38 years. It occurred during one of the feasts of the Jews where there were tens of thousands of pilgrims in Jerusalem. Jesus himself went up to the feast. Every male over the age of 19 was required to go to the 4 major feasts in Jerusalem. And I love what John says. There is in Jerusalem at the sheep gate a pool in Hebrew called Bethesda. John is writing in the present tense. Many scholars think John's gospel was written about maybe 90 AD. But remember, Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD. So some scholars indicate that perhaps this is one of the internal evidence that John's gospel was written much earlier, perhaps before the destruction of the temple. It's also interesting that archaeologists have discovered this pool. Back in the 1800s, they discovered this pool 2 stories down below the surface of Jerusalem with its 5 porticos. Well, this area was like Lourdes. It was a place for healing springs, perhaps hot springs or mineral springs. So the sick would go there, and when the water was stirred up, the tradition was that perhaps an angel stirred up the water, and whoever was the first one in when the angel stirred up the water would be healed. Well, Jesus approaches this one man who had been sick for a very long time. Remember, a person's lifespan was not very long in those days. This man had already been ill for 38 years. And Jesus asked him a really interesting question. Do you want to be healed? Do you want to be healed? Whenever Jesus asks a question, it's not for the Lord's own sake, it's for the sake of the person. Like when Jesus says, "Who do the crowd say that I am?" That wasn't for the Lord's sake. He asked it for the sake of the apostles. Or to Pontius Pilate, when he said, "Are you the King of the Jews?" Jesus says, "Are you asking that of yourself, or have others told you about me?" He always wants the person to reflect upon the question. Jesus says, "Do you want to be well?" And notice the man does not say yes. He begins to make excuses and even to blame others and saying, "Nobody's willing to help me." So he'd be very much a victim, thinking that, that nothing could help him, and that he doesn't even say yes. But Jesus wants to at least have the man reflect upon that question. Do you want to be healed? And Jesus decides to heal him immediately. So he says, "Rise, take up your mat and walk." So he doesn't even lead the man down into the waters. Jesus, as God, can cure illness, lameness, someone being paralyzed. So he immediately cures the man. The man's legs, after 38 years, are instantly healed and strengthened. He stands up. He's so strong, he picks up his little sleeping bag that he had, his mat, and he begins to walk away. Now, the reason why this gospel is during Lent is because it shows the growing conflict between our Lord and the Pharisees, because the Lord often healed on the Sabbath, and he told this man to carry his mat, which was forbidden on the Sabbath. It was considered work to carry a mat. And so the Pharisees approach this man and begin to tell him that he's in trouble for carrying his mat. And the man doesn't take responsibility. He says, well, it's not my fault. I'm just doing what was told by the fellow who told me to take up my mat and walk. Notice he seems to be sort of ungrateful to the Lord. He's not willing to take the responsibility himself. He wants to blame Jesus. And then the gospel ends by Jesus finds the man again in the temple and says, behold, you are well, you are healed. Do not sin anymore, so that nothing worse may happen to you. Well, what's worse than being paralyzed for 38 years? Going to hell for all eternity is far worse. Sin, separation from God, is far worse than any kind of earthly illness or disease. And so then, after Jesus tells him this, he goes and tells, it says, the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who was the one who had made him well. Therefore, they began to persecute Jesus because he did this on the Sabbath. And that's why we have this third sign during Lent, because it shows the growing conflict between the Lord and the religious leaders, which will culminate in the events of Holy Week.